Hello friends, welcome again. Friends, in our previous video lecture, we discussed colonialism as an important literary movement of English literature. In today's lecture, we want to understand what this post-colonialism is, and we will discuss the important features of post-colonial literature on international level. Friends, post colonialism is actually a kind of movement which started in English literature during the second half of the 20th century. So you can say mid 20th century, 1950s onwards, when we read the literature of some of the Asian countries, some of the African countries, some of the Caribbean countries, we come across such post-colonial literature. Now, what is this post-colonial literature? Friends, remember, post-colonial literature refers to the literature produced by the people who were earlier colonized and subjugated by the colonizers. Now, what is this colonization that I have already explained in my previous video, but let me tell you that like Britishers came to India, okay? So Britishers were the colonizers and Indian people, Indian citizens were the colonized people, okay? So post-colonial literature means the literature produced by the people who were colonized by the Europeans, by the Britishers. Okay? In other words, you can say that the literature which is known as post-colonial literature means the body of works. Works means novels, plays, poems. Okay? The body of works written by the colonized people to annihilate the influences exerted by the colonizers in their lives. Right? Say for example from 1700 to 20th century, okay, from 17th to 20th century, the Britishers and other Europeans, they started colonizing and controlling. They achieved the power, political power on India, on Japan, on Australia, on Africa, on some of the islands of America. Okay, so they influenced, the influence of their culture, their religion, their language was still found even after getting the independence from them. So post colonial literature raises this basic problem of how they influenced our culture, and this kind of literature tries to fight against, protest against these influences. Okay, now before understanding post colonialism, we need to understand what is colonization. Okay, it's a very simple term. Let me give you an example. Imagine that you are living very happily in your house with all your family members. One day, one morning, it so happens that some unknown people enter your house forcefully. Okay, they capture your house, your property, all your resources, and they show you weapons, and with the force and power of their weapons, they capture you, your house, your property. Okay, and they start calling you fools, uncivilized, ignorant people, and they ask you to cook for them. They make your slaves, and at the end of the day you stay helpless. Okay, why? Because once you start protesting against them, they start killing you, they start beating you, and you become helpless. So the same situation, friends, happened during the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, on international level. Many European countries like France and Britain, they started expanding their rule on some of the Asian countries, some of the African countries, even they went to Caribbean islands and they captured the lands of these indigenous people. Okay, they started using their resources with the power of their guns. Okay, so in short you can say those Europeans who captured the land of the indigenous people, these Europeans are known as colonizers, and those whose land was captured, they were known as colonized people. This process of capturing and influencing these local people is known as the process of colonization. Look at this map. And this is the world map. Here you can see how in the green color shows us the land which was acquired and influenced by the European countries. So in short, when you look at this map, we can conclude that a major part of the world was colonized from 17th to 20th century. So this process, though it took 300 years, but this process is known as the process of colonization. Now, after understanding this colonization, we need to understand what is post-colonialism. The word post means what? The word post means after. Okay, after colonization. So the period after colonization is known as post-colonial period. The movement of post-colonialism means the ways in which the colonized people means the local people, they started raising their voice against those colonizers, European people. So this process of raising their voice against them in literature is known as post-colonialism in literature, and this process began in the mid 20th century. After getting independence, say for example India got independence from the Britishers in 1947. After 1947, there were some hundreds of writers in India who were writing in English language. They raised their voice against those colonizers, Britishers, and that literature is known as post-colonial literature. Let me show you this nice statement given by Nozippo Maran. Nozippo has put up it in a very nice manner. He says that until the lion learns how to write, every story will glorify the hunter. The students might ask a question, why do we write post-colonial literature? There was a need. Why? Because during after the 20th century, mid 20th century, the hunters were glorified. Who were the hunters? The Britishers, the Europeans. Okay, because they wrote their story. Not only their story, they wrote even our story. So they glorified themselves. In their literature, the Europeans presented themselves, though they were hunters, they presented themselves as heroes. Okay, so the lion was captured by those people. Lion means the colonized people, we people, right? So once we got independence from them, then we started rewriting the history. We started rewriting the story, and that rewriting story is known as post-colonial literature. What is post-colonialism? Helen Gilbert, an important critic, has also defined it in a very small statement. Helen says that post-colonialism is a program of resistance. Resistance means protest. Okay, you go against somebody, that is called resistance. uh, Post-colonialism is a program of protest against the cultural domination. You know, when Britishers were living in India, we adopted their culture, and as a result, we have forgotten our own identity, our own ancient culture. So, post colonialism tries to bring back that original identity, original Indian culture. Okay. Now, post colonialism in criticism as a theory has also been developed during the 20th century. And remember this name, Edward Said. Edward Said published this Orientalism in 1978, and this is considered as a landmark in the history of colonialism and imperialism. Okay, because this book, it is believed is the actual beginning of post colonialism as a theory in criticism. But when we talk about literature, if somebody asks you what is post colonialism, you must have a look at the salient features, important features, characteristics of post colonial literature. So, there are 7 important topics or points which must be mentioned here. One of them is the use of language adopted by the post-colonial writers in their literature. As after 1950s and 60s, there were hundreds of writers who started raising their voice against the Britishers and the Europeans, and for that, the basic problem before them was which language should be taken up to fight against them with the help of literature. Okay, so as far as choice of language was concerned, the writers were divided into 2 broad groups. Okay, the first group they preferred to write in the language of their own. They wanted to write in their own native local language. Say for example, a Punjabi writer, he writes post-colonial literature, novel, poetry, drama. Then he chooses to write in Punjabi language. A Malayali writer chooses to write in Malayali language. Okay, so these people believed that why should we even use their language? Okay, we protest against them in our own local language. But there was another group of writers, they thought that if we want to fight against them, then we must use their language, because otherwise they won't even understand our anger. If you want to show your anger, you need to make them understand what you actually feel about them. So that's why these people, they negated the local language and they adopted English as their language. Okay, and Raja Rao, Salman Rushdie, and so many other like Mulkraj Anand, Chinua Achebe, these were the writers. They adopted English, okay, and they fought against the Britishers. Raja Rao has written a novel entitled as Kantapura, right? In Kantapura, Raja Rao has written a preface to Kantapura, and in this preface, he has presented his opinion about the choice of language in post-colonial literature. He says that one has to convey in a language that is not one's own the spirit that is one's own. So Raja Rao was of the opinion that you can convey your spirit, your feelings, not in your language but in their language. So he was of the opinion that you fight with your enemy and use their weapons, not your weapons. Okay, so as far as language, use of language in post-colonial literature is concerned, there were 2 groups. Now, post-colonial literatures, they presented meta-narrative. Now, what is this meta narrative? Meta means above, narrative means a story. So, story above a story is called meta narrative. Let me explain this in detail. The colonizers, they have considered, colonizers means the Europeans, they always considered the native colonized people as inferior, uncivilized, ignorant people in their literature, okay, because they were also writing literature. So they presented we people as uncivilized, uneducated people, ignorant people, अज्ञानी लोग समझते थे वो लोग हमें उनके साहित्य में। लेकिन जब हमने साहित्य लिखना शुरू किया, कब? स्वतंत्रता मिलने के बाद, तब we started showing our story. So we wanted to write a story above a story. These post-colonial writers, they had a problem with the story which was written by the Europeans. Okay, so they wanted to show another side of the story. So in their works, these writers, they tend to play around this meta narrative. They wanted to show to the world that they were not uncivilized. When we write our literature in their language, in English language, we wanted to show to them that we are not uncivilized people as presented by you people. Okay, so these writers wanted to establish their own identity. They wanted to regain their own honor and respect through the help of literature on international level. So hence, when you read post-colonial literature, you find the other story, and this other story is known as meta-narrative. The third important feature of post-colonial literature is the effects or the impact of colonization. Britishers and other Europeans, they ruled over the world for hundreds of years, and as a result, there was deep impact on our mind, okay, on the mind of the colonized local people. And this impact, it was very difficult to get away, to move away from these influences of the British culture, British religion, British language. Okay, the colonizers' language, this language, English language, displaced our own languages. Okay, before the Britishers entered into India, there were hundreds of languages spoken all around across the country. But now, we have limited number of languages. Why? Because of the influence of English. So we have lost our language, we have lost our religion. This is the impact of the Britishers on Indian people. So this impact, this influence of the Britishers on Indian people has been presented by the writers like Mulkraj Anand, Salman Rushdie, Raja Rao, and so many others when they wrote post-colonial literature. How we have adopted the Western style, Western administration, all such pictures are presented in post-colonial literatures after 1950s or 60s. Fourth important point to which you should note here is rewriting history. Post-colonial literature, it rewrites the history. Why? Because the Europeans, they thought that the people they colonized, they did not have any history. Okay, so they wrote our history, right? They presented their own opinions in history written by them. But we wanted to show that we too have our religion. Okay, we too had our own culture, ancient culture, right? So we wanted to rewrite the history. These post-colonial writers, they wanted to show that we were the heroes before you came to India. before you came to Africa, before you came to rule over us. Okay, so it is a version, the post-colonial writers, they don't like that version which was written by the colonizers. Okay, why? Because that version draws them as heroes and we as uncivilized people. We wanted to show that history can be written. We too have our history, and we are able to write our own history in our own manner. So through literature, these writers, they reminded the world about our origin, about our ancient culture, about our ancient books, ancient religion. Fifth important topic is struggle of decolonization. India, Africa and other countries, they were colonized by the Britishers, right? They were captured by the Britishers. Now the process of getting independence, for that there were hundreds and thousands of freedom fighters in each country, in each colony. They were fighting to get independence. They were fighting against the Britishers, against other Europeans. Like Mahatma Gandhi was there in India, Nelson Mandela was there in Africa, Patrice Lumumba was there in Congo. Okay, so their freedom fighting struggle has been presented in post-colonial literature. So in short, you can say that post-colonial literature deals with the main theme of struggle against the Europeans. Struggle for what? Struggle for getting independence, freedom from the Europeans. It is through their literature that these post-colonial writers wanted to decolonize the mind and culture of the local indigenous people, because politically we got freedom in 1947, but our mind was still colonized by the impact of the Britishers. Okay, so this mission was adopted by the post-colonial writers to decolonize even the mind and culture of the local Indian people. Okay, so this you find in post-colonial literature. Another thing is nationalism, the spirit of nationalism, the spirit of patriotism. When India got independence in 1947, there was a spirit of patriotism, means Desh Bhakti, Desh Prem, which was found among all the citizens, right? These post-colonial writers, they wanted to show this patriotism in their literature. Even they wanted to make the people more patriotic. They wanted to show to the world that we love our country, we respect our country, we respect our own selves. So they write books on behalf of the nation, on behalf of their country. These writers have presented the freedom fighters as great heroes in their literature. Okay, and they have contributed greatly, by raising this spirit of nationalism, spirit of patriotism among all the citizens of their country. And the last point is regaining cultural identity. When you read the post-colonial literature, the major theme of this literature is about cultural identity, is about regaining, पुनः वापस प्राप्त करना. Regain means वापस प्राप्त करना what? Our own lost identity. During the period of colonization, as I told you earlier, most of the people, most of the colonized people, they had lost and forgotten their own language, their own culture, their own religion. And post-colonial literature mainly tries to regain this lost cultural identity. You know, they argued with the Europeans that if you have your religion, fine, we too have our own ancient religion. If you have your culture, fine, we too have our own different culture, and we stick to our culture, we stick to our religion, we stick to our language. Okay, so if we examine the African post-colonial literature, then most of the text novels were written in spoken kind of language. Okay, why? Because before the Europeans captured their country, before that, African literature was mostly in oral tradition. Oral literature was presented. They used to tell the stories, they used to sing the songs. Okay, so they wanted to regain the same style of writing literature. So in today's times, even if you read post-colonial African literature, then you will find that their literature has a spoken touch, though it is written, but they have spoken touch in their literature. By doing this, these African writers, they wanted to show their protest by turning back to this oral narrative tradition. Okay, so these are 7 important points which you should discuss while discussing post-colonial literature. Now, before we end up this video lecture, let's have a look at the most popular post-colonial works in this world. Joseph Conrad has written very popular Heart of Darkness, published in 1899. Chinua Achebe wrote Things Fall Apart in 1958. Franz Fanon wrote The Wretched of the Earth, and Salman Rushdie, again very popular, Midnight Children, and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie wrote Half of a Yellow Sun, published in 2006. Apart from this, we have Kantapura, Raja Rao's many novels. Okay, all these are called post-colonial literature. So friends, here we come to the end of this discussion. Before I leave, I request all of you to please do comment on this, how you like this video, and please share this video among your friends and classmates. Thank you very much.